Can I just advise members in the routine around the use of their electronic tablet devices and so on, keep them on silent, and make Brady your telephone silent as well.
No, it's off.
Especially the ringtone that you have. Okay, and could any members declare any interest relevant to any items on the agenda today? Moving on then to the agenda proper, two apologies. I have two apologies, one from Stuart Dixon and one from Fran McCann. Any other apologies to record? Nothing. Okay, members, moving on then to next item, which is draft minutes, and that's on page 5 of your pack. Just to ask members if you're content to agree the minutes for the meeting on the 10th of April 2014 for accuracy.
Great.
I think the members agree to that, the minutes. Okay, thank you very much for moving on. Item chairperson business, could I just could the committee formally note the passing of a former member of the committee, David McClarty, who was, I think, last attended this committee on the 17th. No, David's last official, I think, duty in the Assembly was as a member of this committee. So the committee just obviously just expressed our condolences to Norma and his family and send a letter accordingly.
Great.
Thank you for his contribution. Thank you. The members have already considered the prospect of rescheduling the meeting, which is scheduled for the day of the election on the 22nd of May, and there was a consideration of having a meeting earlier in the week. Could we suggest that there's only one plenary that meeting, which is on the Monday? Could we suggest that we reschedule the meeting if members want to reschedule away from the election day? But could we have a meeting on the plenary day? We could try and arrange it.
That'd be very helpful, Chair.
So we'll go ahead with the meeting that week. We'll just hold it on the plenary day. And Cabinet will try to ascertain with members the best time if we look at the business over the next day to schedule for the chamber. Thank you for that. Again, members, there is a fairly significant housing conference on the 12th of June, and there'll be a number of members participating, including the Minister. I know I'm chairing it, there's other members as well from the Assembly involved in elements of it. Actually, Kevin was suggesting that it could well be a very useful conference for people to attend. That does clash with the committee meeting. Now, I was due to participate in the conference in the early part of the morning, so I'll be back here again. So Maggie Brady would be the Vice Chair, be able to chair the meeting anyhow. But Kevin was just throwing the idea out there this morning. It is a conference that could be significant, given the content, and wonder would members be of a mind to consider deferring the committee meeting in lieu of enabling members to attend that particular conference.
Yeah.
Where is the conference, Chair?
I don't have the details here. It's the city centre now in Belfast, isn't it?
Yeah, happy enough for that.
Yes, I
We're
agree.
happy enough with that? So it will be a recommendation that members will attend the conference. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much. Okay, members, then moving to the next item matters arising. Just again, we've been advised by the Kevin, the clerk team here, that they receive a roundup of news articles relevant to the committee on a daily basis. I don't know if members are all aware of that, but are members interested in maybe receiving copies of this or being able to have access to it, at least for a while, and see how it goes on a trial basis? Okay, we can do that. Thank you very much. Again, just to remind members then that is a standard approach throughout all of the committees, so we're probably aware of this and elsewhere. We are expected as members to receive a briefing on top tips for using the electronic tablets. There was a view there that maybe around 10 minutes before the committee meeting would start for the next number of weeks, that officials would come along to assist members in the use of their tablets if they want to have that assistance. So I suppose we'll make available from 9:50. If any member wants to turn up to get a little bit more assistance or support for the use of the tablet, I want to try that for a wee while and see, because there's some new additions to the system. Okay, thank you for that. And I'll just draw your attention then to your page 2 of your tabled items, or you'll have a copy of our response from the department in relation to your letter in respect of the evidence provided in the inquiry session recently there by Will Hare. So you'll find that in page 3 of your tabled items. Again, we've been advised by the department that Michael Sands will not be available to appear before the committee at least until the 11th of June at the earliest. So again, that I presume there are lines coming on from Michael on maybe perhaps regular basis. So while it says the 11th of June is the earliest, there's no indication when thereafter. So that's all I can give. And okay. Okay, so I mean, obviously we can do that at a later stage if we want to. We've already dealt with the reschedule committee meeting. Okay, have we looked at it? I'm just again, Rebecca, Sammy Wilson gave apologies. He phoned them in there during the week, so I just want to record that. Apologies from Sammy Wilson. Okay, thank you. Okay, members can tend to move on to the main item on the agenda today, and that's the social housing reform. And this is a landlord indicative investment requirements, a departmental briefing, and we have a number of officials here this morning: Deirdre Ward, Madeline Nelson, and Ronan O'Hara. Could I welcome you all to the committee this morning?
Chairman, declare an interest as before. Landlord. Yep.
Pardon me. All right, so I mean, you're very welcome this morning. So thank you for your attendance this morning and for you provided during the last number of days. So could I, without any further ado, just invite the staff to give us an update? I've just obviously formally welcome the opportunity this morning to hear from yourselves in regard to the important work of the social housing reform programme and where that's actually at the moment. I know you want to deal with one specific aspect of the work of the programme board. So over to yourselves and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for the opportunity to share further detail on our research and engagement on the various issues associated with the social housing reform programme. We presented a lot of information to you at the meeting held on the 27th of February, and the Committee agreed at that meeting that the programme team would come back and meet with you on a very regular basis over the next few months so that we can explore the various elements of the programme in more detail. This is the first of these sessions in this phase of Tranche 2 of the work, and the focus of this paper is on the current and future income and expenditure requirements of the Housing Executive landlord function. The paper details the various costs involved in managing, maintaining and improving the existing stock and compares this to the likely funds available, thereby promoting an understanding of the quantum of investment and funding required over time. This morning is essentially to provide the Committee with further detail and provide an opportunity to set out the next steps following the mandate that the Committee provided, that is to explore all the options in this tranche of the programme. I intend to provide just a strategic overview of the briefing paper on Landlord Project, and then we'll take any questions the Committee has. I'll start just with a quick reminder as to why we're doing this. The programme is exploring to what extent we can change the social housing system in Northern Ireland so that it better meets the future needs of tenants and delivers well-maintained and good quality homes and environment for people to live. It is very much a tenant focus, and this is particularly key in the landlord role. We'll face a number of challenges in the future, not least a financial one. Having said that, the programme is not merely about the financial challenge. It's an opportunity to look at how, working with the Housing Executive, we can seek to maximise social and economic impact, responding to increasing levels of social and economic deprivation in some of our neighbourhoods. There's also a challenge to maintain the existing stock and to bring the housing stock up to a decent standard in some areas. And as we will see, there's a significant issue bubbling up in the future that we need to begin addressing now. We've previously described the dual role of the Housing Executive. On the one hand, it acts as the Strategic Housing Authority, providing a range of services such as, but not extensive, the assessment of need, the administration of housing selection scheme and the common waiting list, and the commissioning of social housing development programme and the supporting people programme. And the Housing Executive is also, as we know, a very large social landlord operating across Northern Ireland, managing and maintaining about 88,000 homes. As you'll see from the analysis in the paper, there's further work to be done with the Housing Executive in decoupling these functions to better understand the costs. The driver for this is to ensure greater transparency and accountability of roles, ensuring that both those roles are delivered to maximum effect. Our analysis to date, particularly on the landlord side, suggests that this function could be under-resourced. In discussions with the Housing Executive, we have developed a medium and long-term plan to identify current and future costs in managing, maintaining and improving the existing stock, to maintain homes to a decent standard and continue to deliver the same or better services to tenants and communities. This has concluded that the available income does not meet the estimated expenditure over the medium term, i.e. the first 15 years. There's a funding requirement of about £758 million. This assumes some level of public funding from DSD, and if that's not available, then the funding gap increases again. Expenditure includes an estimate of the investment required to bring all properties up to a decent standard and maintain them at that standard. This investment is estimated to be £6.1 billion at today's date. Although we have to stress that this is an initial estimate and that the detailed analysis that we'll undertake over the next 12 months will confirm the investment requirement and the priorities for that investment. Expenditure also includes the cost of managing the properties, so staffing costs, local offices, etc. And when compared with other housing organisations, the cost of managing the Housing Executive's properties appears to be low. Further analysis is required to better understand the reason for this, including whether the landlord function is under-resourced and/or the range of services provided by the Housing Executive could be increased or improved to be comparable with other social housing landlords in England, Scotland and Wales. We know that the total spend in the landlord function has declined significantly since 2005, and the average investment per property has reduced to less than £1,500 per property per annum from 2,200 in 2006. It's likely to continue to reduce. Our initial analysis and estimates have concluded that there's significant financial challenge. Exploring the range of options on how best to meet this need may also provide an opportunity to explore how we raise the current standard, not only investment, but creating social dividend and supporting communities to prosper. Much more detailed work is required to firm up these initial estimates, and this work will be taken forward with the Housing Executive over the next 12 months and will be formed by a direct and detailed analysis of the existing stock and the services provided by the landlord. During the next phase of Social Housing Reform Programme, a range of options will be considered to explore the extent to which the landlord funding requirement can be met. This option appraisal will include consideration of continued public sector ownership, along with a range of alternative options and the implications of each option. And we'll be back to the committee with those options, we think, early in 2015, but the work will begin now. Happy to take questions.
Okay, Derry, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Before bringing in other members, there's just two kind of points I'd like to just explore a wee bit with you, Derry.
Yeah.
There's a paragraph, I think it's 9(4), because you're talking about obviously exploring on the basis of evidence and then things, evidence in the future, evidence-based options.
Yeah.
And I'm just a bit concerned when I read 9(4) in terms of does this nearly demonstrate a mindset where there really is no other option, no third option as to retain public housing and public ownership, if you know what I mean? So I'm just a wee bit concerned about that. And does that almost like predetermine an outcome that really there's no option, so you'll have to transfer the stock? And the second point I would look at a wee bit of information on would be around the loans and servicing the loans, and how does that square with the management costs? So are the loans, because if you're trying to compare like with like somewhere else, would outstanding loans form part of the management costs, and how might that look going into the next number of years when you're looking at new build and so on?
Yeah. On 9.4, there's no attempt by us to judge what the options might end up being. We're trying to give the committee an understanding of some of the numbers that we know at this point, which, as we've said, are estimates, and we'll do some detailed work as we go through the year. So it's a statement, as in that's kind of the number that would have to be met. It's not a predetermination of the options. As we said on the 27th of February, all options are on the table, and we will build an options appraisal on every single one of those. So, and bring that back to the committee at each stage.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think in the programme of coming back to you to talk through some of the detail, I think the next session on the landlord is actually to work through the options, so that we'll be going through kind of what the public ownership option would look like and kind of variations of that, as well as some of the transfer options and perhaps a kind of a mixed approach which retains some in public ownership and then transfers some out. So we'd want to come back to the committee to kind of talk you through those options, just to give you reassurance that they're all being looked at.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Megan and Derby.
Thanks for the presentation. I mean, we had the Savile report in 2009,
Yes.
which stated that the public housing here was among, if not the best in Europe. So I suppose it begs the question, where did it all go wrong? Because I presume less maintenance would have been needed for that standard of house that had been carried out, because presumably they were of a decent standard and the executive were building to decent home standards on their properties. So obviously it just went downhill from there on in, so obviously there has to be a reason for that. To talk about the options for public housing has to remain in the public sector. It's the only option. What is the other option? Privatisation, shunted off the housing associations.
Yeah.
We really haven't that great a track record in that area, I would submit. So your options are limited, really.
Yeah. I think as the committee has made clear, we're going to detail all of the work around every single option that is possible. And as Madeleine said, we'll be coming back to talk you through, I think it's on the 15th of May, quite soon, about what all of those options are and how we intend to do the work to understand them better. We want to give the committee the options and then the implications of all of those options, so that you are in the position to make the decisions that need to be made. But we're not prejudging any of those. We will just do the analysis and come back to you with what we think that means, what the implications of them are. So hopefully, as we move through the process, you'll get more and more information on that piece. As to 2009 and why it's different now.
Do you want to cover that?
Yes, if I could comment on that. I believe that the factual statement in 2009 provided by Savills is accurate. The stock is good. It's built to a very high standard. But I think what is important to remember against that is the fact that when you build anything to a high standard, the long-term ongoing cost of keeping it at that standard is correspondingly high. And I'm not convinced that anything has fundamentally gone wrong in the intervening period between 2009 and now. In 2009 there was a clear 30-year forecast of 5.1 billion. We've seen that increase. The direction at this stage is that it's going up. Part of that is fed from the fact that there's a new 5-year period beyond the original 30-year timeline, which wasn't considered at that stage. So I think the statement still holds. The stock is great stock.
Yeah, but I mean, if you consider in the last mandate where DSD were buying off the shelf and private developers, where houses weren't built to decent home standards, it was costing the department quite a lot of money to bring them up to that standard. So it seems a logical conclusion then that all homes should be built to that standard. And of course that wasn't happening, and probably still isn't happening. And if one of your options, I think, is raising rent above, and quite a lot above the rate of inflation, but for a lot of people in social housing, they're getting housing benefit. And the main thing, the problem that people have there in terms of the private rented sector is the local housing allowance.
Yeah.
And of course you have a sector, the private rented sector, which is approximately 200 million of public money every year, and they're totally unregulated. So that's an area I think that needs to be dealt with, because I can't imagine any other body getting that amount of public money and not having any regulation whatsoever.
I think that's a good point, and it's a good point into your question earlier about the options if it's not public ownership, because the housing association sector, it's more of a hybrid. It's not private sector because it is actually regulated. And as part of the social housing reform programme, the programme's looking at introducing rent regulation that would extend to the housing association sector. And that's the case in England, that actually housing associations are more of what you'd probably call kind of quasi-public sector or third sector, in that they are regulated by the Housing Corporation and they do have to follow guideline rent increases. So it is quite different than the private sector. It is a different model.
But there has been a lot of talk here over the last few years about rent convergence, because there is a very distinct gap between housing association rents and housing executive rents.
Yeah.
Considerable.
Definitely, and I think convergence doesn't necessarily mean that housing association rents continue to go up. It might be that they're kind of artificially deflated or kept lower while the public sector rents catch up, and certainly that was the case elsewhere.
And the committee will be aware that we're coming back to speak to you on some of the policy ideas around rent on I think it's the 19th of June, so we'll be giving that a fuller airing and discussion at that point. You'll also be aware that in the Housing Strategy Action Plan, there's a piece of work this year to look at standards. Because you're right, it hasn't been looked at for some time, and that was one of the themes, theme 3 in the housing strategy. So there is some work this year on housing standards to be done.
Deirdre, it just might be worth picking up the point about the rent increase that we put in the paper, which I think is at 9.5. Yeah. I mean, that's really in there, not as a suggestion that that's what we're suggesting should be done, but more to show kind of how low the rents are currently and what you would need to do to kind of get them to the level that they perhaps need to be to kind of get the income and expenditure balance. So we're not suggesting a 33% increase, because that would have to kind of be in year one. It's more of an illustration to say, look, the rents are actually quite low, that to get to where they should be, if you can comparing them with other organisations, you would need a huge hike. We know we can't do that, so in looking and exploring the public sector ownership option, we need to think about how we could spread that out over a number of years, but then we'd also have to look at what's available in terms of deficit grant funding from DSD, and as a consequence what impact that would have on the NI block.
Fine, thank you.
Okay, I think just the record was to say that the last figures we received for 2012 to 13, the money paid to the private rental sector was 310 million that year, so it's a high.
To the private rented sector.
I was being conservative in my estimate.
Okay, so Dolores.
Chair, thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of points. Could I ask, in terms of equality impact assessment and a full impact assessment, how and when will that take place, given the Department's failures to consult on a number of their most recent policy directive changes? Secondly, in the financial circumstance which the Housing Executive finds itself, it's not a level playing field and they don't have the same ability to borrow. Will that be a part of your consideration and form part of your recommendations? And I want to put in record, Chair, that the SDLP supports public sector housing, and that being the retention of the Housing Executive, and will resist moves that don't make sense and seem to be unjust and have ulterior motives, that's for sure. So, Chair, other than in listening to what you had to say, it would strike, I think maybe I picked you up wrong, that in some aspects the Housing Executive would appear to be a value for money in terms of its landlord functions. And the definition, Chair, of the paragraph 3.5, we talk about added value services such as supporting communities and individuals with training and employment advice is not delivered as part of its core service. Yet we know that the Housing Executive provides a very essential tenants association service and does support communities. I know that for a fact. And so therefore, how are you going to define and therefore make judgment against that criterion, and how much of it will be quantitative and how much of it will be qualitative?
Yeah. If take those in order, if that's okay.
Fine.
On the equality impact assessment, yes, waiting for the important key for the programme of the 27th of February, where this committee give us the mandate to do more detailed work in the next phase. It was our intention always to see at that decision point and shortly after to plan an equality impact screening. So yes, we're just about to commence that, and yes, we will be doing a full screening and are just starting that work. It's planned for very quickly in the programme plan. On borrowing of the Housing Executive, the information that we've had thus far from Treasury and others is that it is a Treasury decision about borrowing. So, but we will go back to Treasury and we will discuss and clarify with them their position on all of that. So yes, we will include that in the research that we do in the next phase. And perhaps you want to talk management costs?
On the management costs. I think you're right. When you look at the figure of the 1599, you could arguably say that that looks like an efficient organisation. But I think when you compare it, and we've done that comparison across a lot of other housing organisations, it is out of kilter. Average across those other organisations is more like £2,000 per property. So something kind of doesn't feel right in terms of the number. So we need to do some more work with the housing executive just to understand the costs that are in there. That cost is obviously driven by the service and the range of those services. I think you're right in that the executive does provide some of those services, but I don't think we're necessarily convinced that that's across the board. So some of those kind of added value services around community development, training, employment opportunities might be happening, but not necessarily happening across the board. Or we could improve some of those services and extend them across the whole of the housing executive stock. But until we've done that detail with the housing executive to understand what they're delivering and where, I think all we're saying at the moment is it feels low. Yes, it might be because it's efficient, but also it might be because it's under-resourced. And actually, if we put more resources in there, there could be a broader and a wider range of services offered to tenants.
Chair, the only supplementary that I would have, and I welcome the clarifications, is in relation to housing associations. It's not my experience in general that many housing associations provide the range of service that your paper would suggest.
Yeah, completely, and so that's why the housing executive management cost seems a little low, because when you compare it with NI housing associations, it's broadly similar. But we know...
Oh, it's compared with somewhere else. Very clever.
It's compared with other organisations that are providing perhaps that range of services that are the kind of more added value services. When you compare it to the NI associations, it's kind of on a par. But as you've said yourself, the NI associations don't seem to be delivering that range of added value services.
Yeah, but Chair,
so we need to understand what we're comparing with.
Yeah, and it does depend on the quality.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, so I would require quite a bit of convincing, and I would need to talk to some of the people who have actually experienced the service that others claim to provide.
Yeah.
I think the point is that, and I couldn't say it's universal across all of the housing executive districts because I don't work in all of them, but in any of the work that I've been involved in as a constituency representative over the last several years, a lot of the housing executive officials, district managers, have been key in terms of like the partnership arrangement. Some of them have been the driver of them actually. Some of the cases that I've been involved in. So a lot of our experience with some, particularly some of the, I suppose what you call them, maybe better developed district management teams, they've been quite key in the local communities. Yeah. So it's part of their day job, so to speak. Yeah. It may not be costed in the way in which other organisations maybe perhaps have done, which gives you a figure of 2,000 as opposed to 1,500. So I think that's the point you're making, and I think most of us would actually recognise that. You know?
Okay, and that's something that we need to do. We need to kind of get to the bottom of that and just understand what's being provided where. And I think some of those services we're talking about are perhaps more around, I don't know, like training, employment, job clubs, maybe kind of supporting social enterprises. So some of the kind of the big regeneration type projects that you've perhaps got elsewhere, that might be happening, but it might not be happening, as you say, universally across the board, and that's what we need to understand with the housing exec. It's the extent of that provision.
We're happy to show you some that's happening in my constituency. Yeah.
Thank you, Owen, you're looking at it.
I was just going to add on the question with respect to perceived value for money. As a property and asset professional and practitioner, I'm thinking multi-generational. I'm thinking, irrespective if the asset is sitting in the private sector or the public sector, the duty is to provide it for the future generations. And for that reason, I caution around perceived short-term value. And encourage the need to take the long time frames, the 30, 45 and 60-year time frames, when considering whether or not value for money is genuinely been derived.
Bit like the PwC report on the review of public administration.
Anyway, okay, let's not be distracted. Okay. Michael?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. There are estimated rental income figures included for the 1 to 30 time frame. A substantial number, unfortunately, of housing executive tenants are dependent on housing benefit. And I was wondering what figures have been put in or what assumptions have been made about the levels at which housing benefit are paid, given the possible implications over a 30-year period of welfare reform. What basis of figures have you used?
It's not impacted, I suppose. So the modelling that we've done in terms of the business plan just assumes that rent continues to come in. So we've not adjusted it for any reduction in housing benefit, if that makes sense. So it assumes that those tenants currently on housing benefit would continue to receive the full rent for housing benefit.
That assumption comes up with an arithmetical number.
Yeah.
In terms of pounds, so you're assuming it continues to be paid at the same rate or the same amount?
All we're assuming, we kind of don't assume anything about housing benefit. We just assume that the rental income comes in. That makes sense.
Yes.
So the only way that would make a difference would be on the allowance that we put in there for bad debts, and by bad debts we just mean arrears. So there's a percentage in there for the moment that takes into account inability to pay, and that's around about 2%. If there was a reduction in housing benefit, you would expect to see that percentage go up. So for the moment, we've assumed rents stay as they are, and they just go up by inflation for the 30 years. And as a consequence of that, we've kind of assumed no change in housing benefit. If there was a change in housing benefit and that led to arrears, then the 2% allowance we put in there would have to go up, and the rental income line would go down, so the gap would get bigger.
So there's almost an inbuilt recognition that changes to housing benefit will just simply create debt?
Would create debt, yeah, because the 2% would just go up.
Thank you.
There was an Assembly debate there recently there, and I think the Assembly actually agreed, although it doesn't compel the Department, of course, but there was a motion which was supported in the Assembly there around the need for building more social houses. Yeah. There certainly is a strong argument for it, a need for it. So would there be any thinking around, it may be early in terms of factoring into this exercise, but would there be a consideration in your thinking around, well, you may be looking at building more houses, that obviously would increase then management costs, for example, and perhaps loan services and so on. So is there any reflections on
I think when we go through the options, and when we come back to you to kind of explain how we will look at the options, certainly within each option we will look at modelling a kind of a scenario that includes additional new build and the cost of financing that new build. In terms of the management cost, it depends how many you build. If you're building a lot, you might expect the management cost to go up, but broadly speaking, it tends to get absorbed depending on the total number of new builds. So we'll definitely be looking at scenarios in each of the options, whether that's public or HA or a mixed model. We'll be looking at scenarios around what you would need to do to be able to finance additional new build.
Okay.
And the implications of that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other members? Anybody? I'm getting very late this morning, so no other members. That's good. I think people have only had the paper for a couple of days as well, mind you, but again, this is the start of the process. It's very welcome that we are at this point now. Yeah.
And I mean, we have got a lot of detailed work to do on the management cost, the debate that you're saying, just understanding about what's currently delivered and what can be delivered. And we've certainly got a lot of work to do on the investment need of the stock. Because at the moment, I think as we've said quite clearly in here, it's a desk-based review. We need to get cracking on the stock condition survey that will be a bigger sample than the 2009 survey anyway. We're expecting that to start probably July, August time, and hope to get some early results by the end of this calendar year. So as soon as we've kind of addressed those two big issues, we'll be able to come back with some final detail.
Sorry, could I just ask, in terms of targeting social need, and the criteria for then improving housing stock, are there any ways in which you look that those most in need and a subjective need are at the top of the list? Will you be looking at any of those policy?
If there is a review or there is ongoing work to consider allocations policy, as you know, and we had...
That's different.
Well, in terms of those in objective need being addressed by TSN, it's within really the context of housing divisions policy remit, but I will take that back and just check where we are on that and come back to you on that.
But are you talking about like allocation or building houses to meet a need, or are you talking about addressing refurbishment?
Refurbishment need, yeah.
Refurbishment need is in...
I mean, the stock condition survey should identify where the investment need is. So to some extent, it should prioritise the investment need.
Yeah, but I want to be assured that whenever you look at the housing stock need, that you're based on objective need.
Yes, on objective need. It should be based on stock condition, so the condition of the stock and when that investment's needed in that property. Do you add anything to that, Ray?
No, I think what you said has captured it. To try and just put it in slightly different terms, this is a bottom-up, fact-based exercise. It's collecting primary data in the field based on actual condition, and that in its own right is an objective process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you for that, Deirdre, Madeleine and Rona. Thank you very much for your support to the committee's scrutiny here this morning. So thank you again very much, and we look forward to engaging with you on an ongoing basis. So
Okay, yes.
very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. Okay, members, moving on then to the next item, proposed subordinate legislation. And we have item number 6, the Job Seekers Allowance. Let's see the camera. Okay. And we have Al McCleary, Michael Pollock, Colin Boyle and Brendan McCann here this morning. I think to address this particular item this morning.
I know who you are.
You know who. Talk about rearranging deck chairs.
Right. Okay, on, so I'm this employment regulations. So just hand it over to yourself, Anne, and your colleagues this morning.
Right. Thanks very much for giving us the chance to come along to you today to talk to you about this. If I can begin by introducing my colleagues here. You already know Michael, who works with us. We also then have 2 colleagues from DEL, from the Department for Employment and Learning, Colin Boyle and Brendan McCann. So they're actually involved in the on-the-ground work. If I start by just outlining what exactly these particular regulations do, I think that might help. These regulations will provide the legal framework for job seekers allowance claimants to participate in the employment programme Steps to Success, which is run by the Department for Employment and Learning. This programme is a new adult return to work programme which is being introduced to replace the current DEL Steps to Work programme. Specifically, the regulations will provide DEL with the power to, for example, select a job seekers allowance claimant for participation on Steps to Success, notify a JSA claimant of the requirement to participate in Steps to Success, including the start date and what's required of them and so on, advise of the consequences of failing to participate, and set out the circumstances in which the requirement to participate is suspended. The regulations will also prescribe the sanctions that may be applied where a JSA claimant has failed to show good cause to the Social Security Agency for their failure to attend or participate in the Steps to Success. The sanctions regime, Steps to Success, and this is important, will be exactly the same as that for Steps to Work. The regulations also provide for the circumstances in which hardship payments can be made when a benefit sanction is applied. The current provisions for access to job seekers' allowance hardship payments for those receiving a sanction in respect of Steps to Success will again be exactly the same as that for Steps to Work. Steps to Success participants will remain on job seekers' allowance and will receive their current rate of benefit while they're on the programme. However, in circumstances where a participant is required to attend for 30 hours or more per week, it's proposed that a benefit-based training allowance equal to their current rate of benefit, plus a top-up payment of £15.38 is paid. Again, this is exactly the same as that for Steps to Work. Additionally, the regulations make consequential amendments to other sets of regulations in relation to a person's participation in Steps to Success to ensure that persons will not be treated as having notional income or notional capital by virtue of their participation in the programme, and also provide that travel and other expenses paid to participants are disregarded as income and capital for the purpose of certain income-related benefits. Now, as these regulations affect both DSD and DEL processes, they've been submitted to the Executive Committee for their consideration and in accordance with paragraph 2.4 of the Ministerial Code. Replies have been received from DRD, DFP, DEL, DOE, DE, DOJ and DCAL. All of them had either no comment or agreed to the making of the regs. No response was received from First Minister, Deputy First Minister, DARD, DHSSPS or DETI. Okay, so that's what this is about, and we're here to take your questions.
Okay, Anne, thank you for that. Anne, could I just ask you, just in a few, you just made your last point there about this is going to executive, and executive, you've outlined some of the response so far. Could you just explain to the procedure then, I mean, in terms of the statutory standing of all this, because obviously you're bringing it to this committee this morning, and I don't know then if you have to bring it to DEL as well, so I'm just trying to work out where is the statutory basis for how this is taken forward. Does the executive have to agree, for example, or not? I don't know.
The regulations are made by negative resolution, but because it's a cross-cutting regulation that affects DEL and ourselves, then they're referred to the executive for their consideration. If they had particular concerns, they could vote against them, if you like, but nothing has been received in any of the responses. As Anne said, all those departments that have responded either had no comment or nothing to say in that respect. That was back earlier in about March, I think. The regulations were first submitted through the Ministerial Code, paragraph 2.4, whatever it is, for comment. They're to be presented by our Minister today at the executive meeting, so they're on the agenda for today's executive meeting for executive agreement.
So I'm just trying to again, in terms of what this committee scope is, then we just expect to have a view, or just like, for example, we say, well then defer to the executive has a discussion about it. They're going to meet today, for example. I mean,
well, I suppose it's the same as with any of the regulations that are brought forward, and that would be subject to negative resolution. We're here to advise you that this is something that we're doing. There's a change in the particular programmes that are being run by DEL, Steps to Work, the Steps to Success. The regulations are being made and being laid and would come into effect on 2nd of June, I think it is. if the committee were unhappy about them, they would still have the option of praying against those regulations.
So if the committee was of a view, because I know just in the back of my mind, I'm saying to myself, well then why should I take a decision on this, and the executive's going to discuss it today? Why should I'm just almost being a devil's advocate, so we're just been advised that you're going to table the regulation anyway, and so I'm saying to myself, well then why should I deal with it until the executive deals with it? There's no negative impact of that, is there? No implications from that, I don't.
Well, obviously the Minister, when he presents regulations that are cross-cutting to executive colleagues, what he would ordinarily do is say, I've circulated this earlier, all the departments have responded, you said this, you said that, whatever.
Yeah.
I've also consulted with my departmental committee and I have their backing. And that's part of this process, to advise you what the regulations are doing and to, I suppose, get the support of the committee in taking those regulations forward.
I appreciate that, but I'm just saying, like, again, I'm only using my own instinct for and bring other members in, but if, for example, we were to say, well, look, the executive's going to consider this, let them consider it, and then we'll come back next week, for example, and take a formal view on it. Is there no
I think what
negative
Michael is
implications of
saying
that,
is that I think what Michael is saying is that the norm would be that the executive would take its decision and they would take your views into account rather than the other way round.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Simply because all the parties on the executive are represented on this committee. So if the Minister goes and says, yes, I have the backing of my committee, then your ministerial colleagues sitting around that executive table can say, yeah, well, my party colleagues have considered it. They're happy. So that's the way it goes. It goes that way. As opposed to that way.
We're not going to go there. Anyway, no. Okay, fair enough. Okay, Maggie Brady, thanks for
Yeah,
that.
thanks for the presentation. I have to say this is one party. It isn't. This is one member of one party that isn't happy about the regulations. Just want to maybe draw out a few points, because obviously there's a sanction regime involved with this. And in this group, I think there were groups identified in the Enabling Success paper for lone parents, older job seekers, and ESA subcategory. Those are people who aren't in the support group but have been found not fit for work but able to prepare for work. Would that be right? So the difficulty I have is those people have gone through the work capability assessment, which is so flawed that quite a number of those people may just not be fit for work. But because of the way the work capability assessment is carried out, and it's, improved time and time again. I mean, ATOS themselves are pulling out of it in Britain, because I think they've come to the realisation we've taken whatever we can get out of it, but it's not worth continuing. So it's so flawed that people are being reclassified who, in my view, could well be unfit for work. So it's the first time really that sick and disabled people are going to be subject to a sanction regime under this particular legislation. And there's evidence in Britain, very clear evidence, that these are people who are least able to cope with a sanction regime and cope with that, and probably will end up falling outside the benefit system. Also, there's a category where older people who are no longer able to do their job may be targeted, or will be targeted, because that's the nature of it. So it's kind of slipping in welfare reform in inverted commas by the back door, in my view.
Right, well, sorry, I was going to say I'll ask Colm to
No, I'm
explain
sure
to you what
Colm will.
exactly.
Give us some answers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question.
And there's conditionality regimes for lone parents, which will push them into short-term solutions rather than long-term solutions. And in my view, rather than improve their employment prospects, will actually push them into poverty. And I'm not convinced that this scheme will actually do what it's supposed to do, because in my view, it's actually going to target more and more vulnerable people. So I just wanted to make those points.
Colm, explain a bit more about it.
First thing I want to say is that the drivers for introducing this scheme are pretty much coming off the back of the fact that the Steps to Work programme contracts were expiring. We needed to put in place a new programme. We couldn't extend Steps to Work any further. It had been in place since 2008. Decent enough wee programme, performing quite well, and for the most part, there were some pockets where it wasn't performing well enough. We did a formal evaluation of it. The evaluation showed that it was far too heavily prescribed. We were putting people through particular modules without really sort of any kind of flexibility, lacked opportunity for innovation, and really had a very limited view on sustained employment. So our view of it, and our Minister's view of it, was he wanted to put in a programme in place which is a lot more flexible, much more dynamic, much more innovative, and much more about getting people into work early and keeping them there longer. This has nothing whatsoever to do with welfare reform, front door, back door, sideways door, or anything else. Nothing to do with it. We've been off the mark with this long before anybody was talking about welfare reform. This was a big issue for us, even back when New Deal was going, because we knew at that stage that the whole landscape was going to change in terms of the provider base for the programme. We had hundreds of contracts for providers in New Deal. We brought that down to 10 with Steps to Work, and it was always our intention to bring it down to a smaller number again, to give us a much better consistency of delivery. In relation to the SRAG piece, in terms of any client who's in the SRAG, under Steps to Work, they can volunteer to come on to Steps to Work. When we're now making that change on to Steps to Success, whether or not they come onto that programme will be at the advisor discretion. Now, our advisors aren't sitting on the front line thinking about, I'm worried what benefit you're on. That's not how we think. What we're actually thinking about is, what can I do to help you get into work? I don't mind how much longer you're on benefits. That's not my job. My job is to help you find work and to understand what barriers to employment you have. So the issue that we have for our front line is our front line have got to say, well, look, I've got a range of options open to me here that for example, one of the options open to somebody who's in that category could be Steps to Success, and it may or may not work. And we know in GB they mandate those clients straight on. We will not do that. We are not going down that route at all. So the advisor discretion could be, we've got a thing called Condition Management Programme, which we could refer people to, which could help them. Or we could refer them to another programme which we have, particularly for disabled people, for those people with health conditions, called Work Connect, which is delivered by a consortium of disability organisations here in Northern Ireland. And again, we're putting in place provision that is very suitable for the types of clients we have. And if a client has a lesser barrier in terms of their health and they're closer to being able to find work, and we have the discussion with them, and we go through it all with them, and we jointly agree that Steps to Success could be a good option for you, fine, that would be the best option. But for many of them, it won't be. For many of them, it will be one of the other options, or for others, it could just simply be continue to work with us and our employment service advisors in the front line for a bit longer.
I mean, I'm not saying to you that the client advisors or whatever, the people who are advising people, are not there to do a job. Really what I'm saying is we now have a subcategory of people who never existed before. That's what I'm saying, because...
But you have them
I
on
think
Steps
there's a
to Work anyway.
misunderstanding.
Well, that's what I wanted.
This only applies to JSA.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you have a subcategory created now who are initially, you're not fit for work, but you're fit to prepare for work. So those are people that are moving towards, they will eventually be moved into that area, if you like. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
so they never existed before, and the reason they exist is because of welfare reform, because the work capability assessment, all of that is an integral part of welfare reform.
Yeah,
It's as simple as that's the point I'm making.
The point about that is, no matter what programme we have in place, welfare reform will continue. Even if Steps to Work, even if we were able to extend the contracts for Steps to Work, whatever welfare reform, whatever shape, size reform comes in, we will have to adjust that programme so it's able to react to whatever the new benefit.
No, I'm not. That's not the issue at all. What I'm saying is, you now have a group of people who have been put in a category which never existed before. You either were found fit or you were found unfit.
Yes.
Going back years ago, they had ridiculous situations where you weren't fit for your normal job, but you could be fit to be a bingo caller or something stupid like that, or a lift attendant when the nearest lift was probably, in cases that I dealt with, 40 miles away. So you had that kind of ridiculous, and I can see that moving towards that again, because it's a regressive step, it's not a progressive step.
The key then is whether or not the person is eligible or otherwise for ESSA, because this doesn't apply to ESSA.
I understand
so you're talking about people who are in the work-related activity group with ESSA,
Yes.
and you're concerned that
Yes, exactly.
whenever they come out of that group and are then eligible
moving
for
towards it.
JSA, that then this will apply.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm saying is that then the key is whether they are eligible for ESSA or not. And as long as they are eligible for ESSA, none of this applies. It's all voluntary. As
Yeah, but
Colin
if they're going to
said.
continue to be eligible for ESSA, that's the point I'm making. They would be in the support group. They wouldn't be in the, the work-related group, or would be moving towards
Yeah,
that.
that's-
And in my experience, more recently, the people in that group are taken off ESSA very quickly. That's the
Colin's
point.
point is that there isn't a conspiracy theory here.
Really?
This is
I thought the
Dale
Tories were full of
trying to
conspiracy theories,
assist
but doesn't
people
it?
to get to work and to stay in work. Welfare reform may come, may go. There will be changes. We've had the debate around this table in terms of sanctions and how they're applied and everything else, but it's not relevant in this context insofar as this is merely an improvement, if you like, on a scheme that's designed to assist people to get work.
Well, improvements
Everything else is
Improvement's a kind of a relative word, but I'm sure, Michael, you and I could
the
discuss
intent
this
is to improve
forever
it.
and a day, but you're not going to convince me, and I'm sure I'm not going to convince you, so maybe you leave it at that.
I don't know. Michael Copeland. Thanks, Chair. And I must say I do share the reticence vocalised by my colleague. Well, a few moments ago you said that we don't, and presumably mean Dell and the front office advisors, care what benefit someone's on or how long. No, I can understand that. But if someone is presenting to you on job seekers allowance because quite possibly they've been declined employment support allowance, and there are very major questions for a lot of the decisions that ATOS take, and this person is on job seekers allowance and they appear to be reasonably healthy and rosy-cheeked, and they are sent to a steps to work at this stage placement, but that over a period of time the sanction level is such that their gross income for a 12-month period, let's say, would be in the region of £30–35 a week. What fence for them if they are A, vulnerable, or B, suffering from a non-visible incapacity? How well trained are your frontline staff to say, there's something wrong here? There's something absolutely wrong with what's happening, and then you subsequently go back and find out that there is a known medical condition that actually meant the person was on the wrong benefit in the first place. Have you used any mechanisms that flag up the exceptions rather than the rules?
Well, what we do, we do a job barrier, an employment barrier diagnostic. We train all our staff to look at the person that's in front of them in the round, to look at what issues they do have in terms of employability.
But what's the source of that information? The person themselves?
It would largely be the person themselves, yeah, and that's done through work-focused interviews. And through that work-focused interviews, we drop an action plan for the person. Now, if you have someone presenting in front of you who has clearly got health conditions, irrespective of what it says in a medical report, that would certainly be a factor. But you'd also be looking at, well, what does that report say in terms of what they're capable of doing? What does that person themselves say they're capable of doing? And there's an opportunity in there before anybody's mandated to go near either steps to work as currently or steps to success coming in. There's a period of time there before the mandation. There's months where you can work with that individual to say, okay, let's see what we can do with those barriers. Let's see how chronic they are. Let's see, for example, if our condition management programme is the right one. We've extended that to JSA clients just in recent months, just to tap into that sort of issue, because it's just not the label of what benefit you're on. There are people who are in JSA who also have health conditions who could benefit from the likes of condition management programme, where they need professional help to manage their condition better. If that continues, I know there's a situation where people go back to their GPs and say, look, I'm still very concerned with this. That can continue, and they can feed that back through the medical route. But it's for us to deal with what we have in front of us, to do the best we can to fit someone into the right job. If there were issues about, is this person ever going to be able to get there, then we would certainly have to flag that back, yeah.
Before a sanction is put in place, they have to have committed some error. In other words, not attended a meeting or not done something that they're supposed to do. If someone is supposed to attend the steps to work or steps to success, as we call it, meeting, what assumption is made about the reason for non-attendance?
Well, we would ask the individual why they didn't attend, and if they were giving good cause as to why they were unable to attend, that would raise a question then of whether we would raise a doubt or not.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, we would probably raise a doubt and leave it to the decision maker in DSD to have a view on that.
If someone repeatedly failed to attend to the point where it was almost an abrogation of their own responsibilities, would that raise a question that there may be something more in this specific case that's not being seen? In other words, that the non-attendance was not intentional, but as a consequence of a condition.
It certainly could be. It could be one possibility there. It certainly could be a possibility. But what we would do in that kind of situation is, I think we would flag that to our team leaders, and we would do case reviews of those individuals and have a look at, well, what actually is going on here, and why is this happening with this particular individual, and are there other things that we need to be doing in that particular context?
In the meantime, while that process was going on, the regime of sanctions would continue until such times as the mental or physical ability.
We raise doubts, and sanctions are taken, I think, as a last resort. Now, can I just give you, Brendan, you probably have some of the stats there in terms of the level of sanctions that happen in relation to steps to work, and they're very, very low.
They're relatively low, and the process is that the DEL member of staff raises the doubt, and it's sent to the decision maker in the Social Security Agency, who looks at all the evidence, perhaps discusses the issue with the individual, and then takes a decision. In relation to the steps to work programme, over 140,000 individuals started that programme from September 2008 up to the 31st of March. And of those 140, just over 140,000, around 4,000 received a sanction. So that's around 3% who were actually sanctioned in that period. That gives an idea that it is very much an instrument or a tool that's used judiciously, and that the decision maker in the Social Security Agency, when they're taking the decision, they look at all the evidence that's available in front of them, that it's not a stick that's used routinely. And that's the way we want. We see steps to work, and indeed the successor programme, as something that enables people to benefit themselves, to achieve job or to progress along an employability spectrum. The research that has been done on steps to work on the predecessor programme, New Deals, show that the individuals benefit from it, that there are high levels of satisfaction from the clients on the programme who feel that it has helped them prepare better for work, and indeed in many, many cases has helped them secure a job.
How many of the 140,000 participants would have went on to secure employment who would not have went on to secure employment if they hadn't attended? Is there any statistics on that?
Well, the issue in relation to those who have achieved a job, we're talking about success rates on average of around 25 to 26%. How many of those would have got assistance without the help of the scheme? That is an issue that we could perhaps discuss all day. It's very, very difficult to determine. It was looked at as part of the evaluation, but there is no clear evidence either way.
I suppose the other thing I would say is that most large jurisdictions, countries with an economy they want to drive, will do exactly the same as we're doing. They're not going to say, well, we'll not take a risk here and just look at the deadwood issue. What they're going to do is they'll drive forward and run a back-to-work programme, which is exactly what we need to do. And what we're trying to do is just, particularly for the providers, just trying to loosen up some of the bolts, give them a bit more flexibility rather than drill people through a particular regime. This is to give a lot more flexibility and try and help people back to work much faster than previously.
Your choice of the term back to work is quite interesting. Is this scheme aimed mostly at people who have been in employment and wish to regain employment, or are there tranche who have
No, it's
never
just
been
anybody.
employed?
It's just anybody who needs to
It's not really back to work,
Could be
it's into work.
No, it's
It's
into work.
into work is a truer
Yeah.
definition,
Okay,
yes.
just
So,
No, you're right.
confused.
Thank you, Brady. You're looking back in again.
Yeah, it was just, in your submission, you said the benefits regime combines rights with responsibilities. Basic principle of welfare is something for something. I'm not sure if Beveridge actually said that in his report. At least I can't remember it being included. But anyhow, in return for benefit payments and extra support and find work, claimants are expected to do their best to get and keep a job. It remains the aim to encourage those claimants, GSA or ASA, to take full advantage of the help they are offered to prepare for a return to work. Where someone deliberately refuses such help and support or loses a job, then sanction by way of loss of benefit is considered an effective mechanism to encourage future compliance. It goes back to the point, there are many people going through the work capability assessment and then being put on the job seekers who are not fit. And they may have mental health problems, they may have particular issues, problems that haven't been dealt with. And if they refuse, or for whatever reason, because of their problem, refuse or feel that they're not fit for work, then they will be sanctioned. That's inevitable, so it's based on a sanction regime. And the difficulty is, and it's been proven time and time again, that's one of the reasons why we have the growth in food banks, etc. It's mainly because if you go to the Trussell Trust, to the people who provide them, they'll tell you the main reason they're there is because of sanctions. I'm not saying that the sanctions regime here is as bad as it is in Britain, but I have no doubt that that will increase. Because really it goes back to the point that people are going to be put into that situation. Many people, in my experience, because I'm dealing with them on a basis, who are going to be put in that situation and will end up being sanctioned through no fault of their own, because of particular problems that should have been dealt with at the work capability assessment and hasn't.
I don't think I'll ever convince you in terms of sanctions, Mickey, but it's the natural order of life that there's a carrot and a stick. You have to have the stick in some
I think
way.
it's more as the survival of the fittest.
Policy intent is not to sanction indiscriminately. It never was, it never will be. They could do away with.
I don't necessarily agree with the carrot and the stick, because in the benefit system more recently, it's the stick and the stick. The carrot's been removed.
We were very careful in the design of the programme, Mickey, to make sure that those clients who are in the SRAG have options open to them. It's not just this option. If you looked across the water, you'll see that it's just pop, you have straight into the work programme. This is not what this is. This is an entirely different beast. This is totally out with welfare reform. What we're trying to do is for economic reasons. This programme is economically driven. And it's not survival of the fittest. What we're actually trying to do with this programme is to help everybody, including the hardest to help. And if I thought I was going to put somebody through steps to success and it wasn't going to be the right thing for them, they wouldn't be on it. What we do is we put them through all the other things that we could try and do to build their capability first of all. Then we would try and put them on. And we have asked the Steps to Success provider base to make sure they have a supply chain that can deal appropriately and respond appropriately to the needs of these clients. So that's part of the deal. But there are many people in that grouping who I think will want to do this. There are many people who will see work as the best source of help for them. I know there will be many who won't. So I'm trying to look at the positives in this in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
Could I just finish by asking, will the department set targets for numbers in terms of sanctions, in terms of the number of people that you put through this scheme?
No, we're not setting any. We won't set targets for. We're just going to take it as it comes.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other member want to ask any questions?
Mr. Chair, very briefly, in terms of the Disability Resettlement Officer that was, what involvement is there going to be in terms of that functionality assessment? And I mean, I have to share Mickey's concerns, given our experience at ATOS and the indiscriminate nature in which people nearly are routinely refused, and we all have made representation at appeals for various people where it's quite beyond belief by any of them were given 0 months with chronic and enduring and progressive illnesses and diseases and conditions. And I think that's where a lot of our scepticism come from, that ATOS has been such a complete failure.
Yeah. Well, you can appreciate we have nothing to do with ATOS.
I know that.
Absolutely nothing to do with it. What we're trying to do, though, is help all the clients who need our help to try and get them into employment. We are looking, in terms of, underneath my remit, I've got a disability employment service, and we are looking at refreshing our strategy for disability employment service. And one of the things we're looking at is bringing back the disability specialism within our frontline to actually help the frontline to better diagnose the needs of those people who have whatever type of disability and whatever type of health condition. We want to do that in tandem with the disability sector. Now, we've been working pretty hard on that for the last year. And it'll probably take us another 6 to 8 months to bring that on through. I hope to put that strategy out to consultation with our Minister's approval of it in about September of this year. And that will set, I think, some of your fears to the one side, because we are really absolutely focused and dedicated and want to make sure that we respond to the needs of all the clients who present to us, irrespective of what route way they come, even if those route ways have nothing to do with us and we have no control over them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there's no other member indicating to ask any further questions, so it's up to us now to make a decision as to what we want to do about it. So we've been asked actually to agree that the regulations will be made, and I think I feel a vote coming on because of the content of the discussion earlier on, so that's why I wanted to try and make sure members weren't going out and thinking they've been left out of vote. Yeah, that's why you weren't allowed out of the room, Michael. So, I mean, you were making points earlier on, Mickey Brady, and have you a proposal you want to put?
Yeah, I would propose that the committee rejects the regulation. Just the point that Colin was making, you should think about bringing back the blue card, Colin, that they had years ago, which restricted people and what they may or may not have.
But I mean, what this is really doing now, you know, I'm going to read this out formally, the motion, just in a second. I mean, all this will do will be basically determine the view of the committee, whatever that actually might be. Obviously, as you know, the second is going to do is the day, and then the regulation will be laid, and it will only be negatived by a prayer of annulment, isn't that right? Okay, so can I read the motion? That the Committee for Social Development is content for the job seekers allowance schemes for assisting persons to obtain employment regulations in Northern Ireland 2014 to be made. All those in favour? Those against? Motion's carried.
No, it's not.
Will you vote else, Kevin?
All right. So the motion was thank yourself and your colleagues this morning. Thank you. Addressing all the members' concerns. Thanks very much. Members, we're moving on then to the next item, which is the item number 7, the Business Improvements District Act. And again, your papers, page 54 of your tabled items, and the Department will make a statutory rule on their powers conferred by the Business Improvement District Act Northern Ireland 2013, and the Department proposes to make these regulations to add detail and support for the establishment of bids. And you have the detail of all that in your information pack. And it's just a question then, as a member, is the committee content for this particular rule to be made? These regulations to be made? Remember agreed on that?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And the next item is the statutory rule 121, the Social Security Invalid Allowance. Again, this is page 42 of your table items. Again, this is a regulation which would be subject to a negative resolution procedure. So, if members have no objection, then I'll read this in the motion.
Well, just what I'm encouraging, they're raising the earnings limit from £100 to £102. It means that if somebody earns a penny over £102 as a carer, because they're already getting about a quarter of the minimum wage anyhow, then it debars them completely. So I just want to, carers are extremely badly treated. I just want to put that in writing.
Okay, so then, There is no further objection to that. Now I read the motion on to the record. Okay, that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 121/2014, the Social Security Invalid Care Allowance Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules review. There's no objection to the rule.
Agreed.
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 Any option?
You do, you say you're not agreed?
You can vote against it.
All right, so
As soon as you're not, mate, I just follow you.
okay, so the members agree then that
Must be right if you like it, mate.
okay, members agreed the motion. Just for the record, we need to keep the record straight. Okay, members, next item is correspondence, page 33 of your pack. Members content to note the correspondence as per the memo. Okay, members, thank you very much for that. Next item 10 for work programme. Just to draw members' attention to the draft for work programme on page 49 of your tabled items. Members content with that. Okay, next item, any other business? Anybody want to raise anything under AOB? Nothing to be raised, then the meeting then stands adjourned to our next meeting on Thursday, 8th of May 2014, 10 a.m. Same time, same place.
Thank you
Okay,
very much, Chairman.
members. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland